Hello and thanks for joining us for today's video. We just want to remind you that we're still releasing new episodes of our podcast, Into the Killing. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and anywhere you find great podcasts. We also have a second channel called Paranormally Listed, where we feature paranormal stories like encounters with cryptids, hauntings, and UFO sightings. We'll have a link to that channel at the end of this video. Before we get into today's video, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Magellan TV. A lot of the time when I'm looking for something to watch on a streaming service, I end up scrolling for way too long and then settle on something I'm only mildly interested in. But I never have that problem with Magellan TV. I just go to their new releases section and there's always something interesting to watch. Just the other day I watched a disturbing documentary called My Social Network Stalker. It's the story of a woman named Ruth Jeffrey who was stalked online for 3 years. Her stalker did horrible things, like send naked photos of her to her friends and family. She was almost pushed to the brink of suicide. The only thing more shocking than the stalker's actions was their identity. This is an amazing and mind-blowing documentary. It was creepy and had a great twist. If you're a fan of catfish, you'll love this documentary. Of course, Magellan TV has a great selection of true crime documentaries, but I also really like their history documentaries as well. There's a fantastic series called The Great Commanders. It's a 6-episode series that talks about some of the best military leaders of all time, including Alexander the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Ulysses S. Grant. Each episode is a fascinating insight into these men. Magellan TV has over 3,000 documentaries, so if you scan their catalog for a minute or two, you'll find at least a few titles that will catch your attention. And you should check out Magellan TV right now because they have a great offer for criminally listed viewers. They are offering our viewers 30 days of free service. To get this amazing offer, just go to try.magellantv.com/criminally-listed. So please check out Magellan TV today because you'll find something great to watch and you'll be supporting Criminally Listed in the process. Number 3. Maggie Sheffield. Rocky Point Amusement Park first opened in 1847 in Warwick, Rhode Island. On August 28, 1893, 45-year-old Frank Sheffield and his 5-year-old daughter, Margaret, who went by the name Maggie, boarded an excursion steamer in Providence, Rhode Island. People on board immediately noticed that something was off about Frank. Frank's wife died about a week after Maggie was born. She died from complications from childbirth. Around the same time, Frank had been a school principal, but there was a freak accident with the school bell and he suffered a head injury. The head injury led to him losing his job. Frank had also been a reverend, but a few years ago he renounced Christianity. Frank and Maggie got off the steamer at Rocky Point Amusement Park. After some rides, they went and ate at the Clam Dinner House. He closed the door and locked it, and went back inside the White House residence. After dinner, 45-year-old Frank led Maggie to a wooded area. Minutes later, he walked back to the restaurant and approached one of the park's superintendents. Frank said, "I have just killed my little girl, and I don't know what I did it for." The superintendent thought he was joking at first. Then Frank led the superintendent to the woods, where they came across 5-year-old Maggie, who was bleeding from the head and struggling to breathe. A doctor and the police were summoned. Tragically, 5-year-old Maggie only lived for about another 20 minutes. Frank calmly told the police officer his name and address. He then admitted that he picked up a big rock. One side had jagged spikes. He then struck his 5-year-old daughter in the forehead, just above her right eye. Frank Sheffield was arrested and charged with murder. A preliminary hearing was held the next week, and Frank seemed bored by the proceedings. It was revealed that Frank had been seeing a psychiatrist for several years. Over the years, Frank had said several times he had an urge to kill his daughter. To suppress these urges, he was prescribed opium and cocaine, which were legal at the time. In October 1983, 45-year-old Frank Sheffield was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to a state hospital where he lived out the rest of his life. Rocky Point Amusement Park closed in 1995 after 148 years in operation. Some parts of the park are still there today. Number 2. Mel Yorba. Billed as the happiest place on earth, Walt Disney World in Bay Lake, Florida first opened its doors on October 1st, 1971. It would only take about 10 years before they had their first murder there. On March 7th, 1981, 18-year-old Mel Yorba went to Disney with several friends. According to several news reports, Yorba and his friends were intoxicated. Nevertheless, at some point, they were in Tomorrowland. Yorba pinched the buttocks of a young woman who was the girlfriend of 28-year-old James O'Driscoll. O'Driscoll wasn't happy about this, and Yorba could tell because he took off running. O'Driscoll chased after him. When O'Driscoll caught up with him, he demanded an apology. Yorba punched him in the face instead. The two men wrestled, and O'Driscoll claimed that Yorba tried to strangle him. O'Driscoll managed to get on top of Yorba, and then the men were pulled apart. After they were separated, Yorba's friends noticed that he was bleeding from the chest. It turned out that O'Driscoll had stabbed him twice with an 8.5-inch hunting knife. While Yorba was getting help for his wounds, O'Driscoll tossed the knife into Sleeping Beauty's castle moat. He also took off his bloody shirt and tossed it into a garbage can in a woman's washroom. At the time, Disney had a very unusual policy. They did not want to disturb the illusion of fantasy and make people believe that Disney World was anything less than the happiest place on earth. So police officers and ambulances were not allowed in the park. Police officers had to wait outside for O'Driscoll to come out, and then he was arrested. Meanwhile, a nurse worked on Yorba in the park, then a plain, unmarked van picked him up. The van had no medical equipment or paramedics inside of it. It also had no signs or insignia, so when the driver made his way to the hospital, he had to sit in traffic. Perhaps unsurprising, 18-year-old Mel Yorba was pronounced dead on arrival. Mel Yorba's family sued Walt Disney for $60 million. The case went to trial 5 years later. Disney claimed that there were procedures for calling paramedics, but the nurse was inexperienced, so she didn't follow procedures. That same nurse testified, and she said it was not Disney's policy to call EMTs to the park. The jury ended up siding with Yorba's family, and they were awarded $600,000. James O'Driscoll went to trial in October 1982. He claimed that Yorba had fallen on his knife twice. The jury found him not guilty of first-degree murder, but they were deadlocked on second-degree murder. 11 had voted to convict and 1 had voted to acquit. So a mistrial was declared. James O'Driscoll went to trial again in May 1983. This time, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, which was later reduced to 8 years. James O'Driscoll served his sentence and has stayed out of the news since then. Number 1. Chloe Oddman. Holy Land USA in Waterbury, Connecticut opened to the public in 1955. Based on its name and the image on the screen, you've probably gathered that it's a Christian-based theme park. At its peak, the theme park received 40,000 visitors a year. The owner closed it in 1984 with plans to expand it, but he died in 1986 and the park fell into ruin. 16-year-old Chloe Oddman lived in Waterbury. She was described as free-spirited and befriended almost every person she met. Chloe was deeply loved by her friends and family. On the evening of July 15, 2010, Chloe went out for the evening, but tragically, she didn't return home. Her mother reported her missing the next day. The police began investigating and learned that the last person Chloe was seen with was 19-year-old Francisco Cruz. Cruz initially denied knowing anything about her disappearance. But then, after some questioning, he agreed to lead the police to her body. He took them to the grounds of the abandoned Holy Land USA theme park. In a wooded area, the police found the dead body of 16-year-old Chloe Oddman. Cruz explained to the police that he had known Chloe for about 2 years. That afternoon, he met her at the smoking area of a local department store. They walked over to his mother's house and then decided to get some drinks. They bought 4 cans of a malt liquor called Juice, and then they walked to Holy Land. They sat at the base of a 50-foot cross and they drank and talked. Cruz said that Chloe complained about her boyfriend. Cruz explained he had a crush on Chloe, but she never gave him a chance because she had a boyfriend. Cruz said he was feeling the effects of the malt liquor, and as Chloe laid beside him, he started touching her. She told him to stop and pushed him away. Cruz said at that point he didn't care that he kept touching her. She then elbowed him in the face, knocking his glasses off. This made him angry, so he wrapped his arm around her neck and started strangling her. When Chloe attempted to scream, Cruz put his hand over her mouth. He then pushed her onto the concrete slab of the cross's base, put his hands around her neck, and strangled her until she passed out. He felt a pulse, so he knew she was still alive. He then took off her clothes and raped her. At some point during the assault, she gasped for air. Cruz realized he was probably going to prison for a long time because of the rape. So he thought it'd be better to kill her so she couldn't tell anyone. Cruz strangled her again until she stopped breathing. Cruz had a pocket knife on him. He pulled it out and stabbed Chloe 4 times in the neck to ensure she was dead. He then dragged her body into the woods. Chloe's friends and family were shocked by the viciousness inflicted on someone they considered so loving. Even veteran judges and other court officials were horrified by the crime. Francisco Cruz was looking at a possible death sentence for the murder. However, Cruz and Chloe's family agreed to a plea deal. Chloe's family was worried that there would be decades of legal proceedings if he were sentenced to death. So in June 2011, Cruz pleaded guilty to murder and he was sentenced to 55 years of prison. At the time of this video, 31-year-old Francisco Cruz is serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in Cheshire, Connecticut. His maximum release date is July 2065. If he lives that long, he'll be 74 years old. In 2013, the cross where Chloe Oddman was murdered was replaced with a new one with LED lights. The new owners of Holy Land USA said they plan on opening the park again, but at the time of this video, it's still not officially reopened. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.